From WAMU 88.5 at American University in Washington, welcome to the Politics Hour, guest starring Martin Ostermew. I'm Kojo Nnamdi. Tom Sherwood is in Cuba, or he is on his way to Cuba even as we speak. He won't be here next week, but the week after that, he'll be back again. In the meantime, Martin Ostermew is our guest analyst today. He's a reporter and online producer for WAMU 88.5. Martin, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
And who needs Tom when we've got Jack Evans in studio? He's a member of the D.C. Council. He's a Democrat who represents Ward 2 and chairs the council's Committee on Finance and Revenue. Somebody new to beat up on today. Jack, thank you so much for joining us.
Glad to be. I said to Tom, now don't misbehave down there, or Kojo and I will have to have a rescue mission.
There's rum, there's cigars. How will he not misbehave down there? But hopefully he'll also get some work done, too. This week, the gyrocopter landed on the west lawn of the Capitol. It was piloted by an individual, Mr. Hughes, who saw it as a form of protest. He wanted the Congress to do something about campaign finance reform. He's a postal worker, and he was arrested, but he is now on his way home, and members of Congress are vowing to investigate him. I said earlier that it looks as if there's going to be a hearing as a result of this. We have had a bill for statehood in Congress since 2013. We've never had a hearing.
Never.
So I think it's time for Eleanor Holmes Norton to get on her gyrocopter and maybe buzz the west of the Capitol. We may get a hearing as a result of that. But there was a demonstration taking place for the District of Columbia this week, led by the ubiquitous Adam Eidinger, who constructed a 42-foot Liberty pole, and he and others chained themselves to it on the mall. They'll be there until April the 20th. There's significance there. What's going on?
Well, Adam Eidinger, for those who don't know, he's the guy who's behind the ballot initiative that legalized marijuana in the district. Well, he's been behind a lot of other things, but that's the most recent one. He is obviously very sensitive, and rightfully so, that certain members of Congress have wanted to intervene and stop the district from legalizing marijuana. So this is his way of basically bringing together the statehood movement and the pro-marijuana movement, saying, listen, you may not think they're related, but they are, because Congress wants to crack down on laws that we voted on regarding marijuana. These are our laws. We should have the right to make them. And this happens because we're not a state. So him and some of his friends had constructed this 42-foot pole. It basically looks like a big wooden flagpole with a relatively well-constructed wooden base, so it doesn't just kind of collapse over. But there's a whole lot of additional significance to it. They're also down there wearing these like red hats. They look like Smurf. They look like Papa Smurf, honestly, but they're called Phrygian hats. And these have historical significance. It's apparently the sorts of hats that Americans wore during the Revolutionary War in protest against the British. So they're down there looking like Papa Smurf under this 42-foot banner, kind of like flagpole, making a point about statehood. But that started on the same day that Doug Hughes, the Florida man, flew the gyrocopter over to the Capitol. So they got a little bit overshadowed.
Oh, yeah, because Adam doesn't like being overshadowed.
Not the least.
He would have talked to Mr. Hughes in advance. Think this is a good demonstration here, Jack?
Oh, yeah, it's always a good demonstration. But going back to the gyrocopter,
yes.
Up until recently, I always thought that we would shoot things like that down. Like if somebody jumped the fence and ran toward the White House, the snipers would get you.
Yes.
Apparently, we do none of that anymore. My whole myth of this security has been completely destroyed.
As it turned out, he literally flew under the radar. The radar didn't pick him up.
What does that mean in today's world, though?
That's true. But in the final analysis, I think that the Capitol Hill police, in a lot of ways, did the right thing. Nobody got hurt. This guy was not intending to hurt anybody.
Exactly.
It was just a protest. So, we criticize these people a lot for what they do. I think they handled that situation pretty well.
But I'm a little worried that we're going to jump overboard, only because, again, it's a guy in a gyrocopter. Sure. I mean, yes, you could say that Al-Qaeda is going to weigh these things down with explosives and then fly under the radar into the district and do something terrible. My guess is that if they haven't done so already, they're probably not going to do so now. This guy posed zero threat. Yep. There's certain things that we have to look at and say, all right, let's review our security protocols to make sure that this doesn't happen again, but let's not blow it out of proportion.
Yeah, and that's a good point.
It's like a decade ago when the guy drove the tractor down 66 into Constitution Gardens and just parked it in a pond.
For 2 days, huh?
Right. I mean, that's another question. How do you drive a tractor down 66 and not have anybody call the police?
Nobody even notices.
But it happened.
How do you not get stuck in traffic if you're on 66? A coalition of labor and social justice groups, I'm quoting your report, Martin Ostermule, on Wednesday announced plans for a ballot initiative in 2016 that would raise the city's minimum wage to $15 an hour by the year 2019. There's already legislation in the city that will see the minimum wage go to $11.50 in 2016. Why this new initiative?
Well, they just say it's not enough. They say 1150 was a good start, but that DC has gotten that expensive, especially for low wage workers, that they need to go up to 15. And there's also a national campaign. It's called Fight for 15, started by restaurant workers. So they kind of jumped onto that trend. And the thing that the initiative will also do is that it'll get rid of the discrepancies that exist in DC right now between minimum wage workers and tipped workers. So like restaurant workers, their minimum wage by law is $2.77 an hour, but they have to make enough in tips to get up to the minimum wage. But a lot of activists say that that's rarely enforced or it's poorly enforced. A lot of workers don't know it. So getting everybody to $15 an hour will mean that more people will be able to afford to live in the city, that restaurant workers won't be making less than other minimum wage workers. So they want to put it on the ballot in 2016.
And we have a notoriously liberal voting public
We do.
here in the District of Columbia. Jack Evans, who's going to campaign against raising the minimum wage?
Well, your point is well taken. These things pass when they get on the ballot, no matter what it is, they pass, and they pass with a significant amount of votes. And the only concern I always raise about these things, I think it would be great if everybody got $15 an hour, only though if Maryland and Virginia are paying their workers $15 an hour too. It puts us at a tremendous disadvantage when we are so much out of kilter with the surrounding jurisdictions. Again, in these minimum wage jobs, if you do raise it to $15 an hour, you have a place selling hamburgers. J. Paul's in Georgetown selling the hamburgers. So how do they make the difference? They have to raise the price. They raise the price. Can they stay in business? You know, it's that vicious cycle. And what happens with other industries? The industries then move their jobs to Virginia or to Maryland. So that's the issue, competitive advantage versus disadvantage.
Mm-hmm.
Surely, though, $15 an hour, yeah, but it would be great if people could make that and then they could afford to live here. So we have to look at all of that together.
You know, he went to the Wharton School. He loves this business. He really does. Let's move on, therefore.
Yeah.
The debate over the budget that Mayor Bowser just proposed is about a lot more than ones and zeros. It's about the way she's been accused of using it to consolidate power under her executive office. She says expanding her authority is about making sure there's accountability for the promises that she has campaigned on. Jack Evans, what do you say?
I don't see too much of a problem with this. You know, the mayor is making a pitch to try and control parts of the government that have up to this point in time sometimes been semi-independent. And I think her argument is a decent one. Look, if you're going to hold me responsible, at least give me the opportunity to appoint and not appoint these people. So I think what we'll on the council will do, we'll take a look at it, see if there's merit in it. If there is, we'll do it. If there isn't, we won't. And it always comes back to the council to make these decisions anyway.
If you have questions or comments for Councilmember Jack Evans, give us a call at 800-433-8850. You can send email to kojo@wamu.org or a tweet at Kojo Show. You can go to our website, kojoshow.org, where you can enjoy the live video stream of this broadcast, Martin.
So last week we had DC Attorney General Carl Racine talking about the provision of her budget that would chip away at he says the authority of his office.
Stole my question.
Sorry. Well, there you go. Tom Sherwood leaves and I start stealing questions. So, you know, he claims it's going to deny him the right to act as the independent attorney general that he was elected to be, that sort of thing. Now, you know, what's your take? Do you think that that sort of power should be given to her lawyers versus the attorney general, which is now elected, which is supposed to be independent?
I feel like Jason Worth, and you just threw a fastball right down the center. I've been waiting for this question to be able to respond with this answer. I told you so. This is why we should have held the election in 2018. We were not
there you go.
ready. We were not ready. As you know, I thought this was a terrible idea from the beginning, electing an attorney general. But the voters voted to do it. And what they voted to do was have an independent attorney general for two reasons. Always remember this. Two reasons. Number one, our good friend Mark Plotkin felt we didn't have enough elected offices, right?
Yes.
And number two, everybody was mad at Peter Nichols.
Yeah.
That was it. That's why we have this. Now, going to your point, I want to answer this. The council made a determination that these things had to be worked out and we needed some time. So we put this election off. Superior Court agreed with us. It was only at the Court of Appeals level the two judges said we have to have this election, which we did. So we have these unanswered questions because we never got around to figuring out who has what. You start with the premise that the entire thing was in the mayor's office. We created an independent attorney general that has powers that have not yet been defined. What the council, I believe, is going to do is to take out of the mayor's budget support act that she sent to us any reference to the attorney general. After the budget is done, sit down and make the determination as to who gets what. And I think that is the responsible way of approaching this.
So Mr. Racine said last week that he would not have run for this job if it turns out to be the way the mayor, Muriel Bowser, wants to define it.
But again, when he ran for the job, and I'm not defending or criticizing him, it was undefined. That was clear to him that it was undefined. And so that's where we find ourselves today.
But what always catches me is that, DC voters voted for an elected attorney general for the position to be created back in 2010. Years went by before it became a debate. And I think that's from a DC voters or residents perspective. They're like, okay, we get that, there's some back and forth over what the attorney general is going to do. But at the same time, you had from 2010 to 2014 to figure this out. Why did it take until the last year that it became this big hubbub and then ended up in court?
I think there were many members of the council, including myself, who thought this was a bad idea and shouldn't go forward with doing it. And it's not unprecedented. It's actually happened many times where a citizen referendum is passed and the council steps in and undoes it, because that's our role.
Right.
We did it on the homeless initiative, on term limits, on campaign finance. I can go on and on and on. And so that's the setup of the government we have. And I felt, and many members did, that an elected attorney general was not in the best interest of the city. And I still feel that way. We created a new office that nobody knows what it does, who has responsibility. And the most important thing, and this is what's always out there, jurisdictions that have states that have an elected attorney general, the attorney general's first motive when they get into office is to run for governor. In Virginia, it's almost a given. The attorney general gets elected and announces that he's running for governor. In New York State, every governor was the attorney general. And so we've created this dynamic, which I knew would happen. But we are where we are. And so it's up to the council.
And of course, the attorney general says he has no interest ever in running for mayor of the District of Columbia. But what the voters perceived was a level of independence of this attorney general from the mayor. And what the mayor seems to want to do is to say, no, there's going to be no such independence. Therefore, it's going to be between the council and me to run and oversee everything in the District of Columbia.
And what the council, again, will do is sit down and work this out. What responsibilities lie with the mayor, what lie with the new elected attorney general, and then move forward. And it is our role. And we had hoped to have 4 years to do this. We'll probably now have a couple of months.
And that seems like a good thing to me in the sense that I understand every mayor, when they put out their budget, they put out the legislation that kind of enacts some changes to make their budget possible. I get that. Everyone does it. Now, Mayor Bowser did include a couple policy proposals there that seemed that they shouldn't be in a budget document, which the council has to vote on at some point and has to kind of work with, like this decision to exempt body cam footage from FOIA requirements, from open records laws, the issue of the attorney general. So it's good to hear that the council would actually say, okay, if we're going to debate this, let's have a full debate, let's have the full hearings, let's go through what every other bill goes through and not just lop this into thousands of pages of budget documents, which no one honestly reads.
Yep.
There's a sentiment among some that one of the key pieces of the mayor's plan, hiking the sales tax, regressive tactic that disproportionately affects low-income residents. What's your opinion about it?
Oh, I agree with that. And I think it was not necessary to raise the sales tax. The District of Columbia, you raised the sales tax. We did it once back in 2010 when our revenues were in a decline and we needed money quickly to fill a gap. In this budget, we have increasing revenues and we're raising the sales tax on top of increasing revenues and then raising the parking tax on top of that to even get more revenues. This budget could have been balanced with the money we have. But the mayor is looking for, and I don't fault her for this, but she's looking for an additional $114 million in spending that we are not now currently doing. And in order to cover that spending, she needed to find money from somewhere. She did two things that I would not have done. Raised the sales tax, and then took $67 million out of our reserve funds in O-type money, neither of which had to be done. And both of them are not good financial approaches in today's world. So we on the council now have to look at, can we find a way of getting rid of the sales tax? The $67 million, I'm afraid, is gone. It would be too much money to find. And so it's going to reduce our fund balance, which unfortunately is not something I would have done.
But the fund balance is what, almost $2 billion at this point?
It's 1.87 billion. Right. So this will take it down to 1.81 billion. And I know, you have to be me who really follows this stuff. But in order to get a AAA rating, we need to get up to the 2 billion figure. And we are on a march towards that every year. And it was, remember, during the Fenty years that he took it from 1.5 down to $900 million. It was a scary time because there was an unwillingness to make hard decisions. And I don't want to repeat that, start using the fund balance, because then you have a budget that really isn't balanced. You're relying on extra revenues, extra money really to balance it. And frankly, we don't have to do that in this time period. But Kojo, your point about the sales tax is right. It's a regressive tax. It was lower than Maryland and Virginia. It was a selling point for us in many ways, if only politically. So it was not the best choice that I would have made.
The mayor's agenda is about, she says, paving pathways to the middle class. Nevertheless, she is proposing cutting the budget for the University of the District of Columbia. How do you feel about that?
Well, again, she went out and asked each agency to make decisions about cuts that could be made, and the university came back with these choices, and she accepted those. And I think if I were arguing on her side on this, I would say this. The university, and I know this for a fact, the University of the District of Columbia, the finances are always difficult. We have a very hard time auditing them. They don't do a good job at all keeping track of their money, as I'm told by our auditors. I don't independently know that. I only know what I'm told. And I think from the mayor's point of view, she would probably say to the university, you really need to get a handle on what you're doing, on how you're spending your money, because we give you a lot of money and we're not sure it's being spent wisely. So I think she accepted the cuts that the university put forward and went forward with it.
800-433-8850. Don your headphones, Jack, because we have a call and we have several callers, but we'll start with William in Washington, D.C. William, you're on the air. Go ahead, please.
Hello?
Yes, William, you're on.
Hello?
Yes, William, we can hear you. Yes.
I'm sorry. Recently, the council granted a $30 million bond to Ingleside Rock Creek on Military Road. It refunds a lot of their old debt, pays for buying 4 homes on Military Road, and funds a project that's due to start in 2016. And I wonder how the council came to such a decision after the extremely poor record of the entity.
Well, what I can say about that is it was an industrial revenue bond. And the way the industrial revenue bond program works, it's a congressional program, a federal program that is administered by the local jurisdiction, in this case, the District of Columbia. And Rock Creek applied for that. They fit the criteria that the industrial revenue bond program has, and as a result, qualified to get the money. And I believe you're right. Some of it was used, a lot of it was used for refinancing debt that was at a much higher interest rate, and then for some of the other projects. So we don't really go into the merits of, is this a good organization? It's more, does the organization qualify? We have an office that makes a determination as to whether they qualify for this money.
William, thank you very much for your call. We move on now to Jack in Falls Church, Virginia. Jack, you're on the air. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. My question is about the gyrocopter guy.
Sure.
And I want to know, isn't it entirely possible that with all of the advance warning that all of the agencies that are responsible for defending the National Capital Airspace, with all that warning they had, isn't it entirely possible that a conscious decision was made not to have a violent, bloody interception of this guy in the air and just let him come in and land? I mean,
well, let me tell you quickly what
idea.
The Secret Service now claims or says that it did not, in fact, receive a phone call from the Miami Herald an hour before the incident occurred, but has not denied that the individual had been interviewed twice since he first made the assertion that he was going to do this some time ago, right?
And Jack, I think you make actually a very good point. I mean, everybody asks the question, well, why weren't the jets, why weren't they, sent over from Quantico or Bolling Air Force Base or Andrews? I mean, what are you going to do? Shoot a Hellfire missile at a gyrocopter? No. And you're clearly not going to have Capitol Police taking aim from the ground and trying to bring the guy down. And again, this highlights the issue. It's okay, he got in, let's look at why and how this happened, but let's not, start thinking that we had to bring out the choppers and the airplanes and all the sorts of military equipment to bring it down, because that would have been ridiculous.
Anything that we don't know, Jeff?
No, I don't know anything about it, but I want to agree with Martin's assessment of this and the overreaction that always occurs after something like this happens. It always reminds me of Pennsylvania Avenue, one of my pet peeves. That in the Pennsylvania Avenue situation, a plane flew over the gate and crashed, and there was some other incident unrelated to Pennsylvania Avenue that then led for the Secret Service to close Pennsylvania Avenue, and it has impacted negatively our city ever since. But we've been unsuccessful in trying to get it back open again. They always overreact and then put those big ballards up everywhere that make no sense. So
that peeved the hell out of Tom Sherwood. Jack, thank you for your call. One more call on Gyrocopter Man from Tom in Sterling, Virginia. Tom, your turn.
Hi. The previous caller addressed my question.
Okay.
I recall hearing something about the Capitol being defended by long guns. I imagine the snipers had this guy. Hopefully, the snipers had this guy in their sights and could see that it was just a gyrocopter.
Well, fortunately, they didn't shoot, even if they had him in their sights.
Oh, exactly. But would we be having this conversation if he'd been black? That's all.
I'm not sure they were able to identify him by race. Well, I guess if they interviewed him months ago, they were able to identify him, but that's not a question that we're prepared to discuss at this point. I can't see where race comes into this. Jack Evans, the council voted, and by the way, you can still call 800-433-8850 for questions or comments for Councilmember Jack Evans. The council voted this week not to award a contract to run healthcare in the city's jail system to Corizon Health. This is a contract that went through the city's procurement system that the mayor and the previous mayor supported, despite concerns about Corizon's record of inmate treatment in other states. What swung this vote away from Corizon? What do you think was at stake here?
Well, I voted for the contract for the reasons that you stated just now, and I stated that the process had been followed. Corizon had gone through the process not once but twice, had won both times, and frankly, if we have a procurement process like this, we as the council should follow it, because we are not independently evaluating whether the company makes sense or not. What happened was, I believe the chairman felt very strongly in favor of unity and not Corizon. And at this stage in the council, we have a number of new members who tend to vote with the chairman, and I think that's what swung it in.
Let me raise the obvious question: what's the point of having a so-called independent procurement process if the council can simply overrule it?
And I'm with you 100%. Every council period, I introduce a bill that takes the council out of voting on contracts, which we vote on over $1 million, because we do not have the expertise to make an assessment as to whether or not it makes sense. And what happens? You have a lot of lobbyists come down, convince council members to vote one way or the other, and are stepping into an area where we don't have the expertise. So we are one of the few jurisdictions in America where a legislative body actually acts on contracts. I know how it got there. Came from the Marion Barry era.
Yep.
Sharon Kelly, John Wilson, people who are long gone. There's no rhyme to reason why this is still in existence other than historical.
And what I thought was interesting about the vote is that one of the council members leading the charge against the contract was Councilmember David Grosso, who's made practice of voting present on all the contracts because he doesn't believe that they should be voting on contracts, and he just thinks it's. And we've had even our own local politics reporter here, Patrick Madden, has done a lot of reporting on how you see this kind of like flood of donations from people who have contracts before the council around the time that the votes are happening. And so that raises the issue, is like, should the council be doing this? But then in this case, you have maybe the liberal wing of the council saying, well, we are going to exercise this authority that we otherwise think is a little inappropriate for us to have.
Yeah, and you have the conflict here. You have Corizon, which is a for-profit company. And everyone says, oh, you can't have a for-profit company in this area because they'll cut corners and people will suffer from that. But also a for-profit company is more efficient. On the other side, you have a not-for-profit company that doesn't have to be efficient because the government will just give them money. And so consequently, we spend more money. By doing what we did, just so the residents understand, it is costing us $500,000 a month more than it would have otherwise. That's a lot of money.
And the defenders of unity point to the number of lawsuits across the nation that Corizon is facing. the supporters of Corizon say that if Unity's individual record here was to be expanded exponentially across the nation, then it would have more lawsuits than
Right.
Corizon has.
Yeah.
So is the next step essentially that we keep Unity at the DC jail? They keep providing healthcare on a month-to-month basis until a new kind of procurement process
Yes,
happens?
and I mentioned that in the debate. So they're going to keep providing it. We set up the process again. There are only two bidders, Corizon and Unity. And so what's the point if Corizon wins again? Well, the council just turned it down again. I mean,
Yeah.
if you want to do something, I guess sole source it to Unity and try and get a better deal.
Well, and there's just one thing about contracts that fascinates me that I relate. It was the streetcar system. So back in the day when we bought these streetcars from Portland, originally the winner of that contract was a Czech company that had provided the district with its first streetcars. But this is another situation where, for some political reason or there was some backroom deal that basically they pulled out of that contract with the Czech provider, gave it to this American provider,
Right.
which has now provided streetcars that aren't particularly good, and actually that company is now has stopped producing
Yes.
streetcars.
Yes.
So
Yes.
there's a lot that goes into these contracts behind the scenes that I think the public is unaware of.
Yep.
Unfortunately.
There is a need for transparency here. Here is Richard in Washington, D.C. Richard, you're on the air. Go ahead, please.
Yes, a question. Thank you for taking my call. Question for Mr. Evans. His comment about the bond rating for the district, which I guess is AA now, and he's aspiring to get to AAA. What would the actual difference be, let's say, on an annual basis if we got to AAA? Because that's a slogan I've heard year after year. We can't do this, we can't do that, because Wall Street wants us to do such and such so we can get a higher bond rating. What's the actual $1 million a year figure?
What does that bond rating do for us?
Yeah, it's around the $10 million in savings mark. It would fluctuate, obviously, but the higher the bond rating, the lower the interest rate. And secondly, by having the reserve fund, the way the district operates, on October 1st, when our fiscal year starts, we authorize borrowing. This year it's lower than usual, but it usually is up to about $800 million to run the government. And then we pay it back by the end of the year because our money comes in at various different times through property taxes and income tax. By having that large $1.87 billion, we can use our own money and not have to borrow. So having the big reserve fund does two things: keeps us from having to go to the market and borrow, and secondly, it brings the high rating brings down the interest rate. So we're looking in the tens of millions of dollars of savings. And the third thing is, by having a higher bond rating, not only is it an interest rate savings, it's really a report card on how the city's doing. And Virginia is a AAA rated state. Maryland is. A number of cities in the country are. And we want to get to that category so it gives confidence to both our residents and businesses that we are a well-run city. And keep in mind, when I started this in '91, we were at a double B. And so we have come a long way to, it's a AA plus on Standard & Poor's, which just gave us the upgrade, and then a AAA in our income tax bond. So we're close, and I would really like to get there.
The Post ran an article last week that essentially said Maryland and Virginia are duking it out for a new football stadium and that DC is not in the game at this point. We know that you want the team, the Washington football team, here. But if they went to Virginia or stayed in Maryland, what would you like to see happen with the land where RFK Stadium now sits?
Oh, okay. Now, first of all, let me start with the premise that the district is not in the game. That is absolutely not true.
Once Jack Evans is breathing, you're in the game.
We have had discussions off and on with the Washington Redskins football team, or whatever you want to call them, for a long time. And there is no doubt in anybody's mind, including Maryland and Virginia, who have said this, that the best site for a football stadium in the metropolitan area is the RFK site, for lots of reasons. It was on the news last night. It has a historical significance. It's transportation. We have a metro on site, roads leading in, 10,000 parking spots. There's a whole host of reasons why, if a new stadium is built, it should be a dome stadium where RFK currently sits. Look at Virginia, and not to knock Virginia, but you build a stadium in Loudoun County. Oh my goodness, I don't even know where Loudoun County is.
It's like building an airport in Loudoun County. Oh wait, they did that.
Yeah, and it's still out. It still doesn't have the passengers that National has.
Yeah.
And Maryland, you see the mistake that's already been made. You just be repeating the mistake. So I would hope that when all is said and done, the discussions continue, and we arrive at the idea of putting it in Washington. And let me just mention this thing about the name that keeps coming up. I would hate to see the situation that a stadium is built in another jurisdiction because the name prevents it from being built here, and then the name changes. And so you have the Washington, whatever it is, the Washington Warriors in Virginia. And you don't want to lose. It's a 25-year cycle. You just don't want to lose the team yet again, like we did back in the 1990s.
So again, to play devil's advocate, because I'm very skeptical of football stadiums, mostly because they're used 8 times a year, and then maybe the occasional U2 concert. So that's a good amount of land. This is a small city, growing population, height restrictions on the buildings. I mean, there's only so many people we're going to be able to shove into the city after a certain point. That's a good piece of land to develop for the purposes of residential. And football stadiums and residential never seem to go together. You can't build a domed stadium and then on top of it put like 3 stories of residential, unfortunately.
No, that's right.
If they figure out a way to do a stadium that also has residential involved, like incorporated into it, that's fine with me. But it seems like a waste of land.
Well, I would argue this. The stadium at that site would produce economic development down a little bit further down in the Hill East area,
Right.
where you would get a whole neighborhood built that would be involved with the stadium. And it wouldn't be 8 games a year. In a dome stadium, you can get, like, if you look at Dallas, you can get up to 25 or 30 events a year, which is still not the Verizon Center, but it's still much more than 8. And I think, in answer to your question, Kojo, though, say they decide we're going to Virginia. That's it. We don't want to come to the district. I think the site for a new Verizon Center down the road would make perfect sense. The Verizon Center is now the 4th oldest arena in America. It's going to be, at some point, they're going to want a new one. And so I believe working with the
that's
monument.
the house that Jack built.
Yeah, absolutely. Put a Verizon Center there, and to your point, Martin, a basketball hockey arena is much more conducive to residential, as we've seen in downtown Washington.
Yep, exactly.
And so, consequently, we're not at a. I always like to say this to whoever's listening: we're not at a loss for somebody for the site. So, if the football team decides we don't want to come here, I got to tell you, there's a lot of other entities that would love that site.
Martin Ostermeal, one of the things you should know is that we always have a difficult time getting Jack Evans to leave the studio. So today we're trying a new tactic. We've brought in our next guest,
no.
Senator Jamie
It's Jamie.
Raskin of the Maryland Senate, so that he can get the hint that he's supposed to leave. But before he leaves the room, I'd like to offer some career advice for when and if he ever decides to leave elected office. I don't know if he has contemplated a career in strip joints.
I saw my colleague, my former colleague on the council, has moved into that arena, and
Yes.
It's a lucrative arena.
Exactly
And
right.
so I applaud Jim Graham in stepping up to the plate, so to speak, and venturing into a new.
Former Ward 1
profession.
council member
Yes.
Jim Graham is now the special events director for The House, the strip club on Georgia Avenue. His gay strip night series includes Rock Hard Sunday. It kicks off this Sunday. His series for straight women continues at the club on Georgia Avenue. He said he's going to bring a male belly dancer from abroad. This is an unusual career path for
Unusual but incredible.
Harvard
And-
law graduates.
Right, and he also said he was going to have all of the dancers wear bow ties, which he is known for wearing. He was known for wearing
Absolutely.
on the council.
Yes.
The thing I love about it, after I heard the news, I checked in on all recent council members who are no longer on the council and the jobs that they have, and very traditional sort of jobs. I mean, Kathy Patterson from Ward 3 is the auditor. You have council members who become lobbyists or lawyers, you name it, that sort of
Yes.
thing. Now, he by far has, if not the coolest, at least the most distinct post-council job.
Well,
So
we have another person in the room who went to Harvard. This might be a post-career move for him too. If he loses the election that he's running for, even though he can maintain his Senate seat while he does that. That, Jack Evans, is it for you. Thank you very
Well,
much.
thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to coming back.
It's a
Just,
long farewell.
yes,
just,
yes,
just
yes.
get him out of the room.
remember, as our good friend Mark said, what do you have to do? All you have to do is ask.
Jack Evans is a member of the D.C. Council. He's a Democrat who represents Ward 2. He chairs the council's Committee on Finance and Revenue. Replacing him in the room, hopefully, is Jamie Raskin, a member of the Maryland Senate. He's a Democrat from Montgomery County who will soon be launching a campaign for the United States Congress. He'll be running for the House seat currently occupied by Chris Van Hollen in Maryland's 8th District. district. Senator Raskin, good to see you again.
Kojo, it is wonderful to be here with you as always.
If you have questions or comments for Jamie Raskin, give us a call at 800-433-8850 or send email to kojo@wamu.org. Martin Ostermule is our guest analyst today. He's a reporter and online producer for WAMU 88.5. Tom Sherwood is on his way to Cuba. He'll be back in a couple of weeks. Jamie Raskin, a lot of people were exhausted when the Maryland General Assembly wrapped up work on the 2015 session this week, but you're not taking such a vacation, or much of a vacation. This weekend, you're going to launch a campaign for Congress to fill the seat being vacated by Chris Van Hollen, who's running for the Senate. Why do you want this job? Why do you feel you'd be the best for the people in Maryland's 8th district by serving in it?
Well, Kojo, I have been, or at least I've tried to be, an effective progressive leader in Annapolis, and I've been involved in some of the titanic changes of our times. I was the floor leader for marriage equality. I was the floor leader to abolish the death penalty in Maryland. I fought for restoring voting rights to the ex-felons. I fought for tough environmental legislation. I worked with my friend Brian Frosch on passing one of the most comprehensive gun safety laws in America. Mm-hmm. And I think that I've done a good job, and I would like to bring the same brand of effective, progressive, unapologetic politics to Washington, D.C. to represent the good people of Montgomery County and Carroll County.
Glad you stated all of those successes, because you and your Democratic colleagues in the Maryland General Assembly have been able to move bills on everything from same-sex marriage to the death penalty to guns. Why would you want a job in a place where gridlock is what seems to characterize everything that goes on there?
Well, that's precisely why I want to go. When I first announced for the state Senate back in 2006, I was told two things. One, you can't win. You're challenging the machine, a 32-year incumbent who's president pro tem of the Senate. And two, even if you did win, you couldn't get anything done because the president of the Senate, Mike Miller, while a great guy, is too conservative, and he won't allow any of your liberal politics in the body. Well, neither of those has been my experience. I got 67% of the vote in the primary against the machine, and went on to be part of these magnificent changes that have helped to change America. I mean, if you think about marriage equality, it's remarkable. In 1973, Maryland was the first state to pass a ban on gay marriage, to say that marriage was only for straight people. And then we became the first state where the legislature acted to pass marriage equality without being told to do so by a state Supreme Court. And we are the first state where the voters upheld it at the polls, because the polls closed an hour earlier in Maryland than they did in Maine, where they also upheld it, and also in Minnesota and Washington. But we've been part of a dramatic change in public opinion. What was once thought impossible became inevitable. And that's been my experience of politics, that you get involved because it's hard, you get involved because it's tough, and you create a dynamic of action that changes the chemistry of power.
So, I mean, Kojo beat me to my first question, which is why would you want to go from
my
the
first question in the first segment?
There you go.
It's
So
the same question my wife is asking me, my kids are asking me, all of my colleagues are asking
there
me.
you go. Well, it says something about Congress right now, but I mean, the Senate district you represent right now is relatively small. The district that you want to represent in the House is much bigger. And given how it was gerrymandered recently, it stretches all the way from Montgomery County up to the border with Pennsylvania. It's in a lot of ways probably much more diverse than the district you represent now. Do you think you could bring could you sell those progressive policies you just talked about to a much wider swath of voters, many of whom may look at you and be like, no, I mean, look, I would vote for a Democrat closer to the middle, but not someone that far to the left.
Well, I believe so. I mean, I remember when I made my opening speech for my first campaign, and I talked about marriage equality, and one of my supporters came to me and said, Jamie, great speech and everything, but you can't talk about the gay marriage thing because it's extreme and it makes you sound like you're not in the political center. And I kind of swallowed hard and I said, I guess I don't want to be in the political center. I want to be in the moral center, because the political center moves around. And if you stand on people's rights and you stand on fairness and equality and justice, economic opportunity, the political center will come to you. A lot of my favorite bills have been ones I've done with very conservative Republicans. In this session, I championed and introduced the Second Chance Act with very conservative Republican named Michael Huff, who actually works for ALEC, the conservative national group, but he believes in being smart on crime. And we passed legislation that will allow more than 200,000 Marylanders who have a conviction for a nonviolent misdemeanor offense, like disorderly conduct or possession of small amounts of pot or prostitution, to get that shielded if they've been clean for a period of 3 years or more. And that allows them to get back into the workforce, get back on their feet, and to have a second chance at life. And that's an issue that, for a long time, people thought you could never create a cross-party coalition. And we did. And I did that with medical marijuana with a conservative senator named David Brinkley. He was a cancer survivor, and he felt very strongly that people suffering from cancer or AIDS or multiple sclerosis should have access to what for them is a medicine, a drug. And so he and I teamed up, and we got medical marijuana passed in the state. And our new Medical Cannabis Commission is going to be releasing in next year a whole procedure for sick people to be able to get the drug.
I'd like specificity. If you were in fact elected to Congress, what would be the 2 or 3 issues, or tell me 2 or 3 issues in which you think you'd make a difference, and in which you think issues on which you think you'd be able to get legislation passed?
Well, I mean, let's talk about climate change. It's a sin almost to talk about it as an issue. It's not an issue. It's the whole context within which we've got to decide everything else, from international relations to defense policy to housing and so on. We need a Green Deal in America. We need to realign national priorities so we're investing in alternative renewable technologies and disengaging from the fossil fuels, which did fine for us for a while, but now are really imperiling the fate of the earth. So that's number one, Kojo. Number 2 is the levels of inequality in society are dramatic and stark and scary. And I saw this during the minimum wage fight, which I helped to lead in the state. There are a lot of people who are just barely hanging on. And yet, if you look over the last few decades, we've had huge productivity growth and gains in the society. And yet wage growth and benefit growth is stagnant. And so the difference between the productivity growth and what the vast majority of people are making is a statement of inequality and unfairness. And we've got to challenge that. And that leads, I think, to the final priority that I know I want to work on, and I have worked on, which is the problem of money in politics, because so much of our politics is distorted by virtue of the fact that the campaigns are bankrolled by the smallest slice of people. And now, because of the Supreme Court's atrocious decision in Citizens United, we've got rivers of corporate dark money pouring in through the 501c4 and C6 organizations into our politics and completely distorting the public agenda.
And I mean, you could have made that last point by flying a gyrocopter onto the Capitol lawn. You don't have to run for Congress for that one. But no, I take
I'm doing it metaphorically.
What concerns do you therefore have about the amount of money you're going to have to raise to mount a campaign? Give me your feeling about the role money plays in congressional campaigns.
I mean, I've had to wrestle with that, Kojo. Seriously, when I ran for the state Senate, Maryland has wide open. So, and I said I was not going to accept corporate money or partnership money or LLC money or lobbyist money. Now, of course, none of those people want to give me any money anyway, so it wasn't much of a sacrifice in my case. But look, when I announced on Friday, I said I am looking for small donations, and I think we've had tens of thousands of dollars come in just over the last 3 or 4 days, and I'm overwhelmed by the kind of solidarity and encouragement I'm getting from people, and that's the kind of campaign I want to run. I've always run a grassroots campaign. Someone said, well, there's 800,000 voters and you've only got 160,000 constituents. And I said, hey, I don't have 160,000 constituents. I got 160,000 organizers. Like the people in Silver Spring and Tacoma Park, I think and I hope are going to help me go around to Rockville and Bethesda and Chevy Chase and Thurmont and Westminster and organize and try to bring a strong, surging, progressive campaign to Congress.
Our guest is Jamie Raskin. He's a member of the Maryland Senate. He's a Democrat from Montgomery County who is running for the House seat currently occupied by Chris Van Hollen in Maryland's 8th District. If you have questions or comments for Jamie Raskin, call us at 800-433-8850. You can go to our website, kojoshow.org, watch the live video stream, or shoot us a tweet at Kojo Show, email to kojo@wamu.org. Martin?
So one thing that many people in DC know about you is that you've been a fervent advocate for DC voting rights, for making sure that we have equality here in the district. Now, many of your predecessors have done the same. Chris Van Hollen has. Members of the delegation that surrounds the district are very good on that issue, spare when it comes to the issue of the commuter tax. Now, if you were elected to Congress, would you join them in opposing the commuter tax, or would you say that the district should have the right to tax income at its source, which is, it's a long-standing complaint in the city, and they say leaders here say it really hamstrings them when it comes to raising the money that they think they need for the city.
Yeah, and I understand that, and I think that, look, if
You can wear two hats to answer this: your
Yeah.
constitutional lawyer hat or your political hat.
all right, well, I need both of them to answer it, right? Let's start with the voting side before we get to the fiscal side of it. Look, it is a scandal that America is the only democratic nation on earth where the people of the capital city are not represented in the federal legislature. It just doesn't make any sense. I mean, can you imagine if France disenfranchised the people of Paris? If Mexico disenfranchised the people of Mexico City and said you have no representation in the national parliament, and it doesn't make any sense. Now, there have been special arrangements worked out on the fiscal front in terms of federal payments and payments in lieu of taxes and so on. So it's a complicated issue, and I would decouple those two issues to try to get the voting issue first, the political autonomy issue first, and then deal with the fiscal stuff afterwards.
The other question you raised that popped into my head as a result of something you said was, how do you feel about the national movement for a $15 minimum wage?
I took a look at that yesterday. The National Employment Law Project came out with this report that showed that 40% of Americans are working at under $15 an hour. This at a time when we have more billionaires than ever. And, there was an incredible article in the Post 2 weeks ago about a millionaire who was complaining about the fact that the politicians are no longer paying attention to her in the Republican presidential primary because everyone goes to the billionaires and the mega multimillionaires. And so now, there's a split between the top half of the 1% and the bottom half of the 1%. But what happened to the other 99% of the people that democracy was supposed to be about? So, yes, I think that in the wealthiest society on earth, people should be able to make enough money to support their families so that they can have real health care, so that they can take care of their kids in a dignified and secure way. Now, one of the reasons that I want to run for Congress is because you can't solve that on a state-by-state basis, Kojo. I mean, the minute you talk about raising the minimum wage in one state, the answer is, well, what are they going to do in Pennsylvania? What are they going to do in Delaware? What are they going to do in D.C.?
Jack
And
Evans just said if we raise it in D.C., what's going to happen in Maryland and Virginia?
And so that's why we need leadership at the national level. Instead, it's been deadlock and paralysis.
But at the same time, states influence each other. I mean, DC kind of led the charge on raising the minimum wage to $11.50. Montgomery counties, parts of Maryland kind of followed suit. So, I mean, Virginia hasn't, but still, I mean, so if Maryland went to $15 an hour minimum wage, which you could potentially do if you stayed in the legislature, you could influence Pennsylvania. So it's not like you have no influence whatsoever at that level. I mean, there is.
Well, of course, we fought hard to get up to 1010 where we are now, and then we've got a series of increments that will bump us up over the next couple of years. Look, I agree with you. I mean, the states really are, as Brandeis said, these magnificent laboratories of democracy. I mean, one of the things I'm real proud of is introducing the first benefit corporation law in America to create an alternative corporate entity that would be committed both to its own bottom line, but also to the social bottom line and the environmental bottom line. We now have that in a majority of the states across the country, including in Delaware itself, although we are the Delaware of benefit corporations in Maryland.
Got to talk a little bit about the just concluded legislative session in Maryland. It ended with a standoff with the new Republican governor, Larry Hogan, who threatened not to spend money set aside for education, healthcare, and public employees.
Well, this session was like the age of Aquarius. It was like sweetness and light up until the last 3 or 4 days. But the budget that we introduced passed on a unanimous bipartisan basis in the Senate. And then suddenly the governor in the last few days threw a monkey wrench into it. And I think he did have a fight with the House of Delegates, in fairness to him. And so he's got his story to tell. But we think that this is a balanced budget. It's one that reduces by 69% the structural deficit at the same time that it meets its obligations, our obligations to our schools, to our public employees who've been working hard without a raise for a long time, and meets the other social obligations we've got. So I view it all as kind of a phony fight that was really unnecessary, and it was ginned up at the last minute for some reason. That's the kind of Washington politics we don't need coming to Annapolis.
But Hogan will need Democrats if he wants to do things like rewrite the state's tax code. How much political capital do you feel he has right now, given the last few days?
Well, I mean, I think some of it has been squandered with this fight. But look, I think there are so many bridges between the parties if people can just forget about the next election for a few minutes. I mean, I was very impressed by the governor who, totally unbeknownst to me, came out and had a press conference endorsing the Second Chance Act. And the Republicans, praised my leadership on the floor. You could have knocked me over with a feather, because it's not been like that for the last several years. So I think in general, the story's been a good one between the D's and the R's in Annapolis. And I think both parties have to resist the advice from the national parties that you need to divide and polarize people in order to get your partisan mission done. I think that we do better when we try to think beyond party, at least a little bit.
And this comes right back to what Kojo started with, which is you said such great things about the parties and bipartisanship at the state level, at least in Maryland, and then you think about you're making the leap to the congressional level where it's just the opposite. I mean, there's certainly room for improvement, and I think there's hope, but at the same time, those sorts of bridges are, I would say they don't exist just yet. They might be being built, but slowly.
We can build bridges on criminal justice reform. I want to build a very big bridge on gerrymandering. I think it's a scandal what the party in control in any state does to the other party. In Virginia, a state that Obama won twice, the Republicans have 8 seats and the Republicans have 3. In Maryland, the Democrats have 7, the Republicans have 1. Ohio is a state where they're basically 50-50, and the Republicans have dealt themselves a 2-to-1 advantage over the Republicans. It's just wrong. And so I do have some ideas about how we can break through this, but progress is going to begin with new ideas and people opening themselves up to that possibility. And we've got to remember what a party is. A party comes from the French word parti. It just means a part. And we don't speak for everybody. We speak for one part of the whole, and we got to keep that in mind.
I'm afraid we're just about out of time. Jamie Raskin is a member of the Maryland Senate. He's a Democrat from Montgomery County who will campaign for the U.S. Congress. He's running for the seat currently occupied by Chris Van Hollen in Maryland's 8th District. Jamie Raskin, thank you for joining us. Good luck to you.
The pleasure is mine, Kojo. Thank you for having me.
Quickly before you go, Martin Ostermühl, what's going on in Ward 4 in the district? It's my understanding that former Mayor Vincent Gray has endorsed a candidate among the 12 or so who are running.
He did, and not surprisingly, he endorsed Dwayne Tolliver, who is the not Brandon Todd. Brandon Todd is apparently the leading contender. He is a favorite and endorsee of Mayor Muriel Bowser. And former Mayor Gray's warning was, listen, we need checks and balances. We can't just have members of the council who are beholden to the mayor.
And that election is coming up on April
28th.
April 28th. Martin Ostermühl, he's our guest analyst. He's a reporter and online producer for WAMU 88.5. Martin, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Tom Sherwood will be back in a couple of weeks. Thank you all for listening. I'm Kojo Nnamdi. Coming up Monday on the Kojo Nnamdi Show, Miss Jessie's for Curly, Kinky, and Wavy Hair. A pioneering company brought natural hair care products to a wider audience. Then at 1, Reinventing HR. Companies are experimenting with perks like unlimited vacation time and greater flexibility and getting more dedicated employees. The Kojo Nnamdi Show, noon till 2 Monday on WAMU 88.5 and streaming at kojoshow.org.